Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, getting ready for Red Raiders and Cowboys from Stillwater, Oklahoma. Tech Hoops back in action as they remain on the road, and also revisiting the realignment radar. Pac-12, Big 12. What's going on out there? Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Thanks so much for joining us again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Casey Cowan with the Chris Level, and it's always great to be your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts each weekday. This episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Chris Level joining us from the road as Chris, you're getting ready for Red Raider Hoops coming up, and that's where we'll begin today's episode as Texas Tech remains away from home, this time to tangle with the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. We mentioned a couple of days ago, if you just look at the record on paper, may not get your attention, but as of some recent basketball, and by recent, I guess we mean the last few weeks to a month, Oklahoma State has been a team with momentum and maybe one of the hotter teams in the league or in the country even.
Yeah, I am in lovely Stilly, as they call it. It'd be an interesting game tonight. There's not many times the Red Raiders have come up here and just played well, and it for whatever reason you either are right there with a team and just can't get it done, or you get run out of the building. Oklahoma State, as you mentioned, Cowan, they've won 5 of 6. I think they were kind of trying to figure out a lot of things. There was a few injuries. Musa Cisse is probably the best big man that Tech will face all year from a shot blocking standpoint. I mean, he's Tariq steroids. He's 7 foot. I mean, he's a Memphis transfer, and it's just that'll be the game within the game to watch tonight is when the Red Raiders really get into the lane or down. I mean, they will be very aggressive guarding you on the perimeter because they know that they've got Cisse back there protecting the basket. And, Davion Harmon's game is to kind of, dribble and probe and kind of work his way in and then maybe throw up something or kick it. And it'll just be interesting to see kind of how that part goes. The one storyline, though, for tonight, I think in this game is that I think Oklahoma State may be without one of their key starters really for the rest of the season. We're trying to figure out what the status of Avery Anderson is. I feel like he's been around for a long time, but he has posted something on one of his social media platforms indicating that, hey, I won't be there. I'm hate to miss the rest of the season because of my wrist injury, kind of alluding to some of these things. So I think the speculation is he may be out for the year and having wrist surgery after hurting that TCU over the weekend. If that is indeed the case, and we have no way of knowing what's true, what's not, I don't think anybody would just make that up, but you never know until you get on the floor and kind of see what's up. But if that is indeed the case, that changes Oklahoma State dramatically because that's one of their main guards that they've leaned on, and if he's not there, then everybody, again, it's kind of like what the Red Raiders are having to do without Pop and Fardaws. So that's kind of what we'll be looking for tonight.
Chris, I know we don't have to spend a lot of time on Pop or Fardaws, but since you mentioned them, with either one of those guys, and given the relative lack of possible, team achievement this season, do you begin to transition? I guess maybe this question is more so for Aimaq, possibly, but you tell me. Transition into thinking bigger picture with them health wise as opposed to hey, let's get it back on the floor and try to win these games as your season takes? Does your kind of context around injuries change any for your guys?
It's a great conversation. I think, because I mean, I've thought, okay, if you don't have a lot to play for, what's the hurry? Like, what do they want to rush back if there's not anything really on the line? It's kind of like, certain players opting out of bowl games and like that.
Right.
I mean, there's different reasons why kids want to hurry back and play or don't want to play, whatever. But I'm not real sure what I think Fardaws was fairly close to coming back and playing. If that is still the case, I don't know if I envision him playing tonight or Pop, but I think Pop is somewhat close. But then you hear people speculating. I bet we don't see either one of them for the rest of the year. Who knows? And maybe the truth is somewhere in between. But again, as you continue to lose games here, it does. I think make for a great conversation when you mention big picture, because everybody's going to start. As the losses mount, and you start to realize, hey, we may not be going to any kind of postseason here. Everybody's going to start to look at how, what now, and how does this affect me? What's best for me? Whether it's you're a player and coach and just everybody associated with the program, because obviously nobody's okay with losing, and this is big time business, and you can't really remove that component. So I think it'll be interesting to see with guys like that specifically, like what do they feel it's in their best interest to try to get back as quickly as possible? Do they, because and I don't want to make it sound like I think they would look to leave, but I mean, again, as March gets closer, people start to, and then there's going to be movement with this program. That's just a fact. I mean,
Oh yeah,
whether it's roster, staff, or what, come back status quo. It just that would be the rarest. Even if you had done, and just like last year, you did really, really well, and it was a total, change. But there won't be status quo in place here. I mean, this will be something where there'll be lots of changes. I just don't begin to know what those will be, and to the extent of that.
There are three guys who are safe, Chris Level, Jeff Hackman, Rick Gilbert. Otherwise, check your day-to-day contract, fellas. When you have a season like this, I mean, you're going to hit an off season that results in a lot of change. As a fan, you may like some of that, or maybe excited for some of that time. We'll certainly have it covered here for better. You made a great point there, Chris. You're exactly right. Coming off a Sweet 16 year, think about all the change you had involved in your off season. So consider that whenever you have gone through a year where nothing has been sweet about it. And I guess there's your answer. Before we move on and away from basketball, Chris, just really quickly on the school front, Jalen Tyson's had probably his best 2-game stretch in about a month. Had another little nice one there earlier in January. But when things go well for him, what do you think clicks for him? Is it just an effort thing? Is it being comfortable seeing shots fall early on, makes him feel better later? What do you think works for him with some days like he's had over the last 2 games? Double, 19 and 10 last time, 11 and 9 versus Iowa State.
Yeah, that's a conversation about, aggressiveness and maybe not forcing the aggressiveness. I think that whenever he's been at his best, he's being very aggressive, but it's not forced. And what I mean by that, when he starts to rebound and do some of those things and do some of the dirty work, it's amazing how much easier scoring is for him, or it just kind of opens things up a bit. But what I think when he gets frustrated and tries to force shots or tries to be, too involved on offense, maybe when the game is not necessarily coming to him, I think that's where kind of sometimes the struggles happen, because the teams in this league and the players in this league, whenever they kind of have you in a one-on-one situation and you're trying to just go one-on-one again, like in a half-court situation, it's tough, man. I mean, you got guys that are 6'8" trying to guard you on the perimeter, and there's not a lot of room and all that. So, but I just think when Jalen has been at his best, he's been aggressive, one, but two, he kind of lets the game come to him. There's been a fine line where it seems more natural in the flow of things, but I think where he struggles is when it's like, okay, I'm gonna shoot it this time, and I'm gonna force it. I'm gonna get something up, and it maybe not be the best shot, but yeah, he's man, and I tell you the biggest effect he's had for his team when he's played well is on the glass. I mean, bottom line, it's not really been, the scoring component comes with it, but it's really been about his rebounding. And when he's really played well, he rebounds. When he doesn't play well, that component is seemingly missing.
Decent little first year in West Texas, 10-6 he's averaging on the season. If we're just going to pretend like we're in a situation where, like the old days, Chris, you'd say, hey, look at this young guy. Let's think about what he can be as an older uniform. Way back when guys became older guys in the same uniform. Tyson's a guy you would look at in that kind of context and be hoping he's going to be able to come along because he's a piece you want to build around as a program. And has had a decent start to his Red Raider career and a decent last couple of games. So I'd love to see him show up big in Stillwater tonight. All right, we're back on the other side to process it all for better or worse. Tech and Oklahoma State from Stillwater as the Red Raiders remain on the road for their second of 2 straight. We'll get to business regarding the final score. Coming up on the next step, up dead ahead on Locked On Texas Tech. We're stepping away from hoops. Let's hit the realignment radar. Why was George Clive Kalishnikov, AK-47, the Pac-12 commissioner in the great state of Texas this week? Was he just enjoying our fair weather? We'll investigate. Coming up next on Locked On Texas Tech. But first, today's episode brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook. It's FanDuel, and it's the only app you need to have your Super Bowl covered for your friends, your family, your pets, whoever you're trying to get plugged in. So many great features to make it easy to use, especially for those first timers. So download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Let me tell you again, Super Bowl 57 with the no sweat first bet, you're getting up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't cash. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who's going to score a touchdown. FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, super easy to use. If you're new to it, don't be afraid. Step right on up, sir, ma'am. Best of all, you're going to get paid on your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Glad to have you along for the ride on Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Hope you'll make Locked On College Basketball your second listen. It's your one-stop college hoop shop right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. That's Locked On College Basketball for your second listen. Chris, stepping away from the world of hoops and back to that good old realignment radar. Everybody always enjoys that. And while the radar is still very much spinning, this conversation is more so kind of Big 12 adjacent, because certainly these things could difference that we follow. But we'll begin with Pac-12 reportings this week that George Kliavkoff, Pac-12 commissioner, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but made campus visits to Southern Methodist University and San Diego State University. I think he was on campus, or at least was out of his office to have conversations. And I tell you what, those have been two that have been rumored and put on paper for quite some time to be on the Pac-12's radar. My nose up at it, I got to tell you. So to see something a little bit more tangible as far as what is being reported this week, I'm a little bit surprised at, but maybe I shouldn't be, Chris.
Yeah, I think George Kliavkoff, he may be actually in Dallas right now as you and I sit here and talk, checking out SMU and maybe attending their basketball game. It was either last night or tonight. But, yeah, I mean, definitely I think it's there's a reason we're bringing all this up, because I think you mentioned that it's Big 12 adjacent, because I think there's some pieces here and components here that certainly affect Texas Tech and the Big 12 and all those things, depending on how this plays out. I think, though, what is interesting is, based on what has been reported, the Pac-12 can't get a deal done right now from a media rights standpoint unless they – I don't want to talk absolutes here, but it seems like it hinges upon needing more inventory or needing to replace USC and UCLA to satisfy whatever media partners they're talking to. It's also worth mentioning that they are basically, it's widely reported that they're going to really dabble heavily into the streaming component here, which I think is a bit tricky, but they're in a position of I don't want to call it desperation, but it may be close to that, where they've got to secure enough money. And if that's really who's offering it, you really don't have a choice. Now, I think that, your Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark was kind of, I think if all things being equal, or even slightly more money coming your way, I think he preferred to be on linear cable, just because of exposure and just ease of, the ease of everybody to be able to, consume it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because I don't know about you, but like even those Amazon football games on Thursday nights by the NFL, and I watch a lot of NFL, I would just find myself not go through the whole menu to kind of pull it up, because then you're kind of stuck. You can't change the channel. You can't flip during commercials, all that stuff. Right. And that's
Chris, that's one thing, just on that access point, that's one thing that I discussed with Bob, former Fox Sports president, when we had him on the show a couple of months ago prior to the Big 12 deal, was, some, I guess, silver lining going digital with ESPN Plus if you had to, because ESPN was already, and I can say it firsthand from a Hulu standpoint, is already integrating ESPN Plus offerings within their regular guide. So there's already some bridging of the gap there, where you're not leaving the app to then go over to ESPN. Now, that's not the same yet for like Amazon or Apple or some of these other options, but that was part of what, I guess kind of, the reason to be able to stomach it was better about the ESPN Plus aspect, was it was already seemingly becoming more so integrated in what people watch it. But yeah, you're exactly right. And by the way, I'm super young, super hip, super fluid, on the move, off the cuff. And even I was irritated by having to get out of one app watching college football to go to another app to watch the NFL on Thursday nights. And being super young and irritated by that, I can only imagine what some older folks are going through, right?
Yeah, they just throw their hands up, be like, you know what, I'm not.
They just quit life.
Well, one of the other. I think, though, that as this relates to the Big 12, this is going to be really interesting. As this relates to the Big 12, this is going to be really interesting, because now what you have is essentially, do some of these schools, namely, let's just take it to Washington, do they really have an opportunity to go to the Big Ten? The Big Ten is about to have a new commissioner, or do they want to sign off on a new Pac-12 with the SMUs and the San Diego States of the world? And who's willing to, where are you willing to cast your lot? I mean, can the Big 12 make a move now? Is the Pac-12 indeed vulnerable now that some of this is out there? There's a variety of moving parts here, and it's ultimately the Big Ten is going to call the shots here, and then the ball is going to roll downhill. So if, because I can't imagine if Washington and Oregon, namely those two, if they feel like they have a legit shot to go to the Big Ten, that they're re-upping or agreeing to sort of grant of rights with anything as it relates to the Pac-12.
Yep.
Whether they add San Diego State or SMU or whoever the heck, I just can't imagine that they would say we're committing long-term here, or even short-term, without the option to get out as soon as the Big Ten comes calling. And then that's where the Big involved, because if there's any movement there at all, I mean, and who's to say, I guess the Big 12 doesn't like try to lure Washington and Oregon too, if the Big 10's not interested, because those are the two that I think would be the top of the food chain. We've all kind of looked at it from the standpoint of, if Oregon and Washington do move, then at that point you start talking the, Utah and Colorado and the Arizona schools and things like that. But, because I mean, if you add Oregon and Washington, to me, all of a sudden it's like Gonzaga as a basketball only school makes a hell of a lot more sense. But again, I don't know the money involved here, but anyway, this has got some effects to the Big 12 based on what happened. So this little trip to Dallas by the Pac-12 commissioner to check SMU, and ultimately SMU would be, that's going to be interesting too, because if they do agree to that, I mean, their games are being all played mostly all on the West Coast.
Oh yes, Pacific Coast city, Dallas.
Yeah, that's right. And you're seeing it opens up the recruiting pipeline to the state of Texas, and there's probably some
pipeline, man. That's a long pipeline.
And there's probably some truth to that, but yeah, that's you're getting to the bottom of the expansion list when you start talking SMUs. No offense to those guys, but that's you're grasping there, because I think the Big 12, they've already vetted San Diego State. I think they've talked about it long and hard, because that's a good market. I think San Diego State's got some things going for it, but I just don't think that the Big 12 looked at it. This doesn't do anything to help us at all. We're going to sit tight, and in fact moved on to Gonzaga as basketball only, and have talked about UNLV as potentially a basketball only and some things like that. So yeah, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that report to come out last night, and I didn't know it stood, but it's fascinating, because the Pac-12 can't get their media rights deal, it doesn't look like, unless they tweak their current situation and try to replace USC and UCLA, and that's quite the step down when you're talking about USC and UCLA to San Diego State and SMU and the Pony Express.
I don't know. SMU, UCLA, SDSU, same numbers. What's the difference? Same number of letters. What's the difference? When you texted me this week, I texted back that desperation is a stinky cologne. And I mean that, and I'm laughing at that from the Pac-12. And I'm doing that as a fan of a team in a league that added Cincinnati, Houston, UCF to their league last time around. So I do understand, or maybe irony, and me laughing at the Pac-12 because of what we just had to add. But Chris, I'm just fascinated watching this play out, because I've been calling this for years on whatever sports broadcasting airwaves I occupied, and it's not because I have any great insight. It's just because I know what numbers are bigger or smaller than other numbers. And this entire conversation, this entire ship that is now sailing through the port of destruction for the Pac-12, launched whenever the reality became that USC, for their third-tier athletics rights, were making comparable to, say, Texas Tech as an example. They were 12 million behind Oklahoma. They were 20 million behind Texas. They were whatever million programs and Big Ten programs. And it was at that point that you had to know, all right, well, whatever the Pac-12 is currently, they're not going to remain that, because USC is not going to remain as so little resourced comparatively blue bloods across the country. So here you go, Pac-12. And this has been years in the making. Here you go, Pac-12. What are you going to do to kind of address that, maybe save yourself? Well, they did absolutely nothing, and that's why USC is gone. So to now see the next step in this process, Chris, which is, like these stages of grief, I guess you could go through. This is the denial stage still. They're not like grief just yet. This is the denial stage. And I'm really wondering if all of a sudden, you mentioned it from a Big 12 standpoint, kind of bring back the dream, possibly, of Oregon and Washington, because that dream has been a total pipe dream to me as far as the Big 12 is concerned. If they can go to the Big 10, they'll go to the Big 10. If anybody could go to the Big 10, they would go to the Big 10, right? So I'm more so focused in on those four corners, which I think would be worthy additions. Sounds like Utah might be a little bit dilutive, possibly, but either way, that's what I've been focused in on. This becomes really interesting now because of the timeline, the urgency of it all. And it all starts with that television card. They still don't have one. And it is outrageously late in the game for them to not have something new. And the options that they're getting are not the options they want. Look, I don't care how progressive you want to be with streaming rights and how much money they're throwing at you. Nobody wants to be there. They want linear access. It may change in the future, probably will, but they don't want to be there right now, and certainly don't want to have it taken up some like big chunk of their inventory. And so for the network on notice, or the networks to put them on notice via a lack of an agreement, Chris, really speeds up that timeline. And you're exactly, you kind of talk about the face-off now between the Big 10, Oregon, Washington, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, and maybe even those other. They're all kind of like separate groups in my mind, because Oregon and Washington are kind of, to me, entities unto themselves, you know, given what they would be as far as Big 12 targets are concerned. So I don't know. Do you think it kind of reinvokes the possibility of something involving the Ducks and the Huskies? Could we actually go that far if you were to say, just like you did a moment ago, well, the Big Ten isn't quite ready to make that move, and Oregon and Washington ain't quite ready to be partnering up with SMU to have their games broadcast on a streaming platform? I don't know, man. I'm daring to dream right now. I don't know if I'm going to buy into it, but it's almost like it puts that back on the table.
Well, I think what's timetable. What is interesting is the Big Ten really in a position to make any decisions right now without any leadership, with an outgoing commissioner and trying to search for a new one, because they may not even know what they want or have nobody that's in charge. Now, there may be some of those institutions in place, Michigan's, Ohio State's, and et cetera, that are kind of like, this is what we prefer, because if that's what they prefer, then that's what more than likely the commissioner will be like, yes, sir, let's go get it done. But I don't know what domino falls first here, because the Pac-12 may be trying to hurry as fast as they can to get some resolution here so they can get an agreement done so they can start the money coming in. But again, I just am curious if some of the pertinent parties here, if they're willing to commit to that, or if they're like, no, we're good, man, we're gonna sit tight, and then at that point maybe there is no deal. So Chris, I don't know what domino falls first.
Here's my domino prediction. Big, after you and I have been doing this for another 5 years, we can look back on this episode February 8th, 2023. Here's my prediction. Pac-12 is so desperate. I really think the Pac-12 will offer unequal revenue sharing to Oregon and Washington for the time being. I really think that Oregon and Washington want the Big Ten so bad above all others, and I get it, that they would, for some period of time, accept that, waiting for a better time for a Big Ten migration. The problem for the Pac-12 is it's not like it's, San Diego State out there and Oregon State you got to appease. No, there's Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, programs that think themselves. Now, they may or may not accept an unequal revenue sharing arrangement, but I think we've all already learned what that leads to. It leads to eventual dissolution. It's not good for anybody. So I really do see Oregon, Washington to accept that. I see the Pac-12 as a conference being willing to offer it, but in that willingness, do they destroy their standing with other league members presently, namely those that the Big 12 has been making phone calls to? If I had to just put your money on it, I think I might go with that. I asked the aforementioned Bob Thompson about unequal revenue sharing possibility, and he certainly did not turn his nose up at it. You know how that goes, just like I do. We've experienced that in the Big 12 conference. But to me, that's the Band-Aid, the simplest Band-Aid maybe I could see sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, and what is also interesting is if you remember back. Remember when the Pac-12 was talking about going or I say Sweet 16, Pac-16, when they were talking about adding, and all the conversations were, hey, TCU, Baylor, they're not involved here because the Pac-12 isn't interested in the smaller, religious, based
Right.
institutions, right? Well,
Right.
that's funny how things have certainly changed.
You noticed that, huh?
Yeah, the plate has been widened a bit, just to accommodate here. But yeah, I think all is on the table, man. When you talk about unequal revenue sharing or kind of thinking outside the box. Here's the one thing that I'll say: with all the movement being discussed, and you've kind of had some meetings, and Gonzaga's been thrown out, and he's been thrown out, and you're trying to figure out with Texas and Oklahoma. One thing that I know for a fact is that Brett Yormark is thinking of all and entertaining all possibilities, and that part, that's a good thing, because I don't know if we were always if we were always believing that Bob Bowlesby was willing to do anything about it. But I know that your mark is certainly, now that he's on the job and some of this movement is taking place, I feel very confident that he's going to explore every opportunity to make this league better. And, and again, that may be why there's been no Gonzaga movement here, because they're waiting on some of these things to kind of play out before they even get to that. Or maybe that's a worst case scenario. Who the heck knows?
Really, really interesting to see what's taking place. And you're on the money with a reminder of all the different things, not just like small private religious or whatever, but all the different things the Pac-12 has at over the years that could have maybe kept them solvent as a league. Yeah. Instead, you went and got the internet director and drove it into the ground. Terrific job, Cal Berkeley. You've done a wonderful, wonderful job. And I know it's worthless to even talk is like Cal Berkeley, because they have to be reminded they have a sports department. So that doesn't really satisfy you. I don't know who to pick on out there, but they're getting what they've asked for, man. Pride comes before the fall, and they are falling now. Hopefully Southern Methodist doesn't turn their nose up at you. Pac-12. This should be really, really interesting. And hey, maybe we get something going on here sooner rather than later. I kind of thought maybe the realignment waters had cooled because of this non-television agreement there for the Pac-12, or that's not there for the Pac-12. Chris, this is keeping this urgency heated up, right? Until they get that settled, there are going to be some people pedaling their feet under the water fast and furiously, because this is crazy late in the game to not have a new agreement.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think they've long since passed their exclusive rights window. I mean, they're approaching, the deadline here. It sounds, I mean, by this report coming out, it's indicating, hey guys, we don't have enough inventory to according to the TV folks right now. We're trying to go acquire it by adding 2 schools. I can only imagine how, like, the Colorado States, the Boise States, and even some of those other institutions that get tossed around from an expansion standpoint, they're probably like, well, hey man, we're interested, but
like Nevada, New Mexico throwing rocks at Klivekoff's plane as he flies over them to get to Texas. Like, hey, we're down here,
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think that, basically the Pac-12 has basically shown their vulnerability with this out there. And, look,
and that's good for the Big 12, right?
SMU and San Diego State are going to jump at the chance if there's an actual offer. I just don't know what it means for those current members, and if they're just kosher with all of that, and if they're willing to sign up long term and lock themselves in when there's other possibilities out there to be had. Because we already know too that the Big 12 has stated and some of the reporting there that their deal changes with members being added, and so I think it's already built in to your current contract, or the new contract, I should say, that hey, if we add another institution or plural, then everybody, gets compensated accordingly. So, and there may be certain levels of institutions that's built in there, but you get what I'm saying. So it's already kind of factored in. So anyway, I'm curious to see what it looks like. I think, there's a sense of urgency, certainly from the Pac-12 standpoint, but not sure if everybody else has that same.
Just hoping for good things. 12, and I think instability elsewhere in Power 5 land certainly could lead to good things for the Big 12. So keeping a close eye on that. And there are tiers in the Pac-12. There's no doubt. There's Oregon and Washington who have got all options before them, including possibly a conference that'll bend over back them for the short term. You've got that middle window, Chris, with those four corner schools, Arizona's and Utah, Colorado, that have some options. Probably don't want to bend over backwards, possibly, for Oregon and Washington. I don't know. And then you've got like the Oregon States, Washington States. They'll play with anybody that'll invite them over. They may just rather stay home and play with themselves. I don't know. They're very lonely people. But there are certainly tiers as far as the interest for these little groups of programs still remaining within the Pac-12. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the result is, with hopes kind of pulling in various directions, so to speak. And we'll have it covered right here on Locked On Texas Tech as this continues to evolve. Chris, enjoy Red Raider Hoops coming up tonight. You may think I'm just being mean by saying that. I really mean it. There's no irony in that statement. I really mean enjoy some college basketball. I'll be back to break it down coming up tomorrow. Maybe Texas Tech can do something interesting in Stillwater, Oklahoma, man. Thanks for the insights and the time as always.
Yes, sir, man. Keep hope alive. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Back here on Locked On Tech, another round, and hope you will be too, making us your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And remember to make Locked On College Basketball your second listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. For Chris Level, I'm Casey Callan. We'll see you on the other side on Locked On.